I'm Lou Berney, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Lou Berney.
Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. I'll be talking more about her as the month goes on. Also, thanks to R.J. Panero, his upcoming book, Avenue of Regrets, is an engrossing psychological thriller. Coming up in November, we're going to be talking about it more this month and talking with R.J. Thanks to him for sponsoring the show. As always, after the show, there's an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lou Berney on the phone with me. Lou has a fantastic new book called November Road, and you guys, this book is amazing. It hits all of the notes that I look for in a book. It's historical fiction. It's a thriller. There's some conspiracy in it, and it's a story about powerful women. And as a lot of you listeners know, I live with a house full of women, and I love these kinds of stories. These are stories I can share with my family and feel good about it. And so anyway, Lou, this is a fantastic book. Can't wait to talk to you about it. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Hank, and it's great to be here.
Yeah. Lou, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
That's a good question. I think my first memory is probably the family dinner table when I must have been 4 or 5 years old, and everyone just telling stories. And in my family, that was how we communicated, made each other laugh, and just engaged, was telling stories around the dinner table. So for me, I think that's my very first memory.
I love it. You have an interesting accent. What part of the country are you from?
I live in Oklahoma City. Was born and raised in Oklahoma, and then lived away for many years, and then moved back with my wife. So we live here now. And I think, being back, my accent comes back out a little bit. I feel like I lost it a little bit when I was in California, or at least I'd like to think so. And now it kind of creeps back in a little bit.
Yeah. I'm from South Mississippi, and we had this great tradition when I was a kid, and more so when I was a kid than the way life is now. But there was a lot of sitting outside with the older folks and grandparents and uncles and aunts that would come around, and there really is this deep storytelling culture in especially big families and in rural areas. It seems like too. Is that true for Oklahoma?
I think so. A lot of Oklahoma is southern. I mean,
Right.
A lot of the people who settled Oklahoma are from the south, and then it's also got that frontier element. It's the west in a lot of ways, and so you got all those frontier tall tale tellers. So I think in some ways it's out of both streams of the culture in a way.
Yeah. When telling stories around the dinner table. When did that become something more than family entertainment for you?
Well, that's hard to call. I'll tell you when I first thought I might want to be a writer for a living was in high school. I was a freshman, and somehow I can't remember why I ended up on the high school newspaper. Maybe I got in trouble and they made me go work for the high school newspaper. But I had to do a story, and I think it was just on the basketball team or something. But I saw my name in the newspaper, my byline, and I was like, I like that. And all of a sudden I was like, maybe this is for me. Maybe I can be a writer or an author. And it kind of just opened up a door for me that I had never even imagined was there before.
In your bio, you talk about having spent time doing all sorts of things before kind of landing on the path that you're on now. What was it about newspaper delivery that you just weren't into?
Well, there's a lot of things I wasn't into, Hank. I'll be honest. I got fired from a lot of jobs when I was a teenager. I worked in a movie theater, and I got fired from a couple different movie theaters, and I worked at restaurants. I got fired from those, and I was a maintenance man. Got fired from that, and nothing terrible, just usually laziness or incompetence. And I think what it is I'm just generally a lazy person, and except when it comes to writing. I am fanatic about writing. I love it. It's what I love to do, and it's a great gift of my life was that I figured out something I was sort of good at and also loved to do, and was able to pursue that.
I love it. It's until you find your thing, people call you lazy and incompetent and good for nothing, all that. But then when you find the thing, they're like, "Oh, well, he's just the most genius, thing ever." And you're like, "Well, this has been me all along. I just didn't find my spot until now." Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So what was the first project that you started working on that you knew was going to be the thing that made it?
Well, I went to graduate school for creative writing because I didn't know how to write fiction, and I thought I better learn how to do that. And I was working on a short story, and it all started clicking. And I think I was 24 years old, and somehow every writer will tell you some version of the story. I'm sure, it's just like the characters start coming alive for you, and something's happening that I think the story is smarter than you are. And when you realize that, it's kind of a magical moment, and you realize, like, all right, I got to approach this a little bit differently than I would something else.
So, well, you said when you were in graduate school, what made you want to pursue writing in college?
Well, I studied journalism in college, and because I thought I would write, I'd be a writer and make a living at it, and I discovered fairly quickly that I'm better at making things up than I am at reporting things. And I can do the reporting, and I love the research part and interviewing people, but I just got bored with the facts. And so fiction just allows me to do the best of what I love with journalism, which is research and interviewing, but then I can kind of go off on my own and make things up. And I think I'm just a born liar at some point, and I needed to write fiction.
I've talked to a lot of writers that began in journalism, and they talk about how the structure of journalism and the learning to look for the parts of the story that no one else sees, that those were handy tools for writing fiction. But it sounds like for you, it's just none of those things were a fit, and you already had the stories in your head. You just needed the freedom to go tell them.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I did learn a lot from journalism. I'll tell you, it's a great education for a novelist. You learn to write fast, and you learn to pick out, like you said, what's important. So I don't think I'd be the writer I am without having gone through all of that work and experience. So, you're sort of a product of everywhere you've been, and for me, a big part of it was being a reporter and working in journalism.
So what was that first story that you wrote and published that got you really into fiction?
It was a story, God, it's been a long time. It was a story about a tabloid newspaper reporter who was chasing all these bizarre stories. At the same time, he was dealing with some very real, mundane tragedies in his own life. And I wrote it, I sent it out, and it was, the New Yorker accepted it as the first story I ever sent out, and I was kind of stunned by that, and I'm still stunned by that, and I thought, wow, I could not have planned this better. But of course, after that, there's lots of ups and downs, but it was the real kick that I needed at the time to have a little bit of confidence in what I was doing and to keep pursuing it.
Yeah. So was that a short story that was published in the New Yorker?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the difference to you in writing short stories and novels? The the craft is a little different. Some people approach it the same, but some people look at it as completely different things. Is it a different approach that you use when you know something's going to be maybe 5 to 10,000 words as opposed to 100,000 words?
Yeah, it's for me, I haven't written a short story in probably 25 years because that was something I figured out early too, which was lucky, is that I'm really long-winded. And so my natural form is the novel. Like I can't do short, try as I might. And I love short story writers. I mean, some of my favorite writers are short story writers. And it's just, I think there are writers who can do both very well. But for me, I know right away that like it's too short for me. Like 5,000, 10,000 words is just, I like to have those asides, and I like having the digressions, and I like scenes that don't necessarily, fit perfectly. And so for me, a novel with a little sprawl to it is my natural medium, I think.
One of my favorite writers of all time is Ray Bradbury, and he was such a huge proponent of writing short stories, and that people should, learn their chops by writing short stories again and again and again and again, and learn to get that beginning, middle, and end, and then graduate to novels. But that's just not always true. Some people are just not fit for that, and while he makes it sound so accessible, sometimes it's just not.
I'll tell you though, I agree completely with what you're saying, but I also agree with Ray Bradbury, because I learned a lot from writing short stories, because it would have been a disaster for me to try to learn with a novel, because I didn't even know, I didn't know what a third person perspective was, there's so much I didn't know, and so to sort of work that out on a short story is much more sane and efficient than trying to do it in a novel. So I actually learned a lot. I just also learned that this is not my bag, that I need to have something longer for it, basically.
Yeah. Well, and learning what you're not good at is just as important as learning what you are sometimes.
I agree with that. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So what was the first novel that you published? Was that Gut Shot Straight?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a novel I wrote. And I remember it was a really dreary winter, and I had a lot of family issues going on, and I was in a bad mood, so I thought, I'm going to write a novel that's fun and fast and colorful and set somewhere exotic with good food and nice beaches, and a story that's going to be fun to read and that will be fun to write. And so that's kind of where Gut Shot Straight came from, which is kind of an Elmore Leonard caperish novel. And I had a great time writing it. It kind of rescued me from my own life, and also kind of just brought me back to fiction in a way that I'd kind of drifted away from it. And so, like, readers read to escape a lot, but I was writing to escape, and ironically, it kind of brought me back to what I love most.
Are you a big fan of the Elmore Leonard style of story?
I am. I love Elmore Leonard. The truth is, I love so many different writers. I mean, I read everything, and I love all kinds of crime fiction, but I read all kinds of fiction too. And so I have a really broad taste, and if it's good, I'm all into it. But yeah, Elmore Leonard has always been someone that's kind of inspired me, that I like. There's a vernacular to Elmore Leonard that reminds me of another one of my favorite writers was Flannery O'Connor. Yeah. And so those two writers just kind of speak to me deep down in a way that I felt like, okay, I can try to do something like that, even though it won't be as good as them. I can try to at least follow those footsteps.
I didn't really notice it while reading November Road, but now that you mention it, there's there's some of that Leonard immediacy to your writing. Not that it sounds like Elmore Leonard, but I could definitely feel that kind of nod to his style of writing, and I could definitely see that.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, I always love to be in the same sentence with Mr. Leonard, so that's great with me.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you follow that book up with?
My second book was a sequel to the first one, and then the third book I wrote was a standalone, and that was a real departure. And for me, it was kind of like another breakthrough, where the first two novels, I had a lot of fun writing them. I also knew that there was more I wanted to do with novels, that I wanted to have both dark and light.
So, Whiplash River, the follow-up to that, do you think that you had kind of found this voice that you were looking for with that book?
I definitely found characters I was really crazy about. I loved them a lot, the characters, and I loved writing that, and I loved I got a feel for the structure of what I wanted to do. And so it was a fun book because I felt like I had established the pattern and the structure, and I just had to kind of now inhabit it in a way that was original. But it was a lot of fun to write.
So, between there and now, you wrote another book, The Long and Faraway Gone. Was this book a bit of a departure from the first two books?
Yeah, The Long and Faraway Gone was a real departure from the first two books. I loved writing those first two books. And I also knew, though, that I wanted to do more with a novel. Like, I wanted to have all kinds of shades of black and white and gray. I wanted to have darkness and light, humor and tragedy. And so with Long and Faraway Gone, I just had a bigger canvas with a lot more colors. And I think that was the book where I really realized that this was the kind of novel that I need to be writing, that I want to be writing. Like, it was the kind of novel I can do best for me. And so it was a real departure. It was a lot harder to write, but it was a lot more satisfying once I had sort of brought it home.
Yeah. From that book, we come to November Road, which is your newest book. And this is such a phenomenal novel. It's like, I really can't even compare it to anything that I've read in recent memory. What brought this story to your mind?
Well, thanks. First of all, I really do appreciate that. With November Road, I think the seed of the inspiration was my mother. There's a main character. One of the main characters in November Road is a woman in her late 20s with two little girls who's living in a small town in Oklahoma and sort of supporting the family because her husband's a drunk. And my mom, who passed away about 10 years ago, was the most ferociously intelligent, resilient person I ever knew. But she'd grown up very poor during the Depression and never had any opportunities whatsoever. And so a couple of years ago, I was looking at some photos before I was born when my sisters were 7 and 8 years old. And I was just thinking about, like, what if? Every writer thinks, what if? And I was just thinking, what if my mother had made a different decision in her life? What if she had left my dad? What if she had gone on the road? What would have happened? And so November Road kind of came out of that, just wanting to imagine a different, life for her. I mean, I didn't know if that was going to be a good decision she made or a bad one. I mean, that was the thing. Like, all the way till the end, I was never really quite sure if this was going to end well or badly for her.
Wow. So that's a lot of, angst to carry around, for a kid to process and then carry into adulthood. How did that then merge with this tapestry, this background of the JFK assassination and then this kind of grand conspiracy? There are so many moving parts to this book, yet they fit together so well and seem so natural. When I'm writing things, sometimes I'll have an idea that seems like so far in left field, and then maybe I'll hear a conversation or see something, and then, eventually those things will dovetail in some way, and then it seems so natural, but they can be so disparate. How did these different elements come together for you?
Well, I knew I always wanted two different main characters, and I knew I wanted them to sort of collide at one point. And so I just think about who are the two most different kind of people you could get in the most different kind of places. And I've always been interested in the mob. I mean, I write crime fiction, and I went to college in New Orleans. I know all about Carlos Marcello, who was the mob boss of the 50s and 60s, and who a lot of people at the time had no idea was the most powerful and dangerous man in America, in terms of the mob. And so I just thought, like, all right, let's see what happens when worlds collide and these two people happen. And my agent actually was the one who said, he was just wondering, like, well, what about the Kennedy assassination? Is there anything you could do with that? And something just really clicked for me because I'd always been fascinated by the Kennedy assassination. We used to go down to Dallas every summer, and my dad would always drive us past the Texas School Book Depository, and I'd always get chills looking up at the sixth floor window. And so, it's those, like you said, those little weird, disparate things and pieces coming together, and it just started clicking, the different parts of it. They're like, all right, that makes sense, putting them together maybe.
When you start talking about the Kennedy assassination, people have some strong opinions about their pet theories and just the reasoning, because it's such a even though I wasn't even born yet, it was about 8 years before I was born. We all have these feelings about it. Even if you weren't there, it's something that that's kind of become part of our culture. When you start talking about that and digging and looking for as writers do, those little facts that you can put in that really grab a reader's attention, were there any things that you found that piqued your interest?
I did a lot of research, and I left most of it out, which was probably wise, because I didn't really want to focus on the Kennedy assassination, but I found out a lot of really fascinating stuff. And like you said, people argue about those, they all have strong opinions about the conspiracy theories, but the facts are really fascinating, like the stuff that is not up for debate. Like, I found out, for example, that John F. Kennedy's brain after the autopsy was sent to the National Archives. And in 1966, it disappeared, vanished, it's gone. No one knows what happened to it. And that's a fact. And I'm like,
right.
You got to be kidding me. Like, no wonder there are conspiracy theories. So, you learn these little tiny bits and pieces that it was a fascinating time. It was a wild time. And I try to embody that in my novel, that, America in the early 60s was not this idyllic, calm, peaceful place. It was popping, man, and there was a lot going on, both above and beneath the surface. And to me, that was like a big revelation, and I loved incorporating that into my novel.
The story is really held together by the story of your protagonist, and this woman that is modeled, at least in some ways, after your mother. What was so important to you about having her in the story, and what do you think that character brings to the story as a whole?
I think that character is important just because it shows you, a person who makes choices in her life and then fights for them. And she's fighting not only for herself, but for her two little girls. And I think that idea that we all kind of want and need to fight for ourselves and for the people we love, and need to change our circumstances and change ourselves and change our lives to be better and to have a better life, is something that's really profoundly American. And so it's always been really kind of interesting to me, and it's something that I wanted to really have Charlotte represent in the novel.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that this novel is it really touches on so many different genres, and as soon as you think you have the story pegged as something, you throw us a new thread, and we go on this other adventure that's connected to the whole thing, but we think it's this, and then no, we think it's that. As a writer who normally writes crime fiction, like you said, was it ever in your mind that this is going to be kind of a multi-genre book? This is really going to be an adventure that goes all over the place. Was that in your mind at all, or do you just go where the story takes you?
I think it's both for me. I think one of the reasons I love the crime genre so much is that it's so expansive. Like, there are so many different kinds of crime writers. I mean, you have Lee Child on one end of the spectrum, and you have Megan Abbott on the other. Yeah. And they're both crime writers, but you would never mistake them for each other, and I love that. And so for me, I love all different kinds of crime stories. So in my book, I was like, okay, sometimes I'm going to be writing hard-boiled, and sometimes I'm going to be writing something completely different, but they can all fit together, under the one big tent. And I think that's what I love to do best. And so I kind of embrace that rather than resist it. Yeah.
I get it. Lou, what do you hope people get from this story? It's it's kind of this great American novel. It deals with things we're all familiar with and characters that we can see ourselves with. What do you hope people take away from this book?
Well, I think you said it best. Like, I hope people can't turn it loose. You know, like, I love the idea that people pick it up and don't want to put it down, because that's my first job as a writer, is to keep a reader turning the pages and saying, well, this is a hell of a good story. And so that's what I want first and foremost. And then beyond that, you know, I want them to think about characters and people that might not be like themselves, but might share some qualities. And that's what I love about great fiction, is that you're kind of transported into other lives and can kind of imagine what other people are like. And it's a form of empathy that I think is really healthy for everybody, no matter what your belief system might be.
Yeah. Lou, if there are new writers out there who maybe are working on their great American novel over the course of the 4 novels that you've published and all the work that you've done, is there a piece of advice that you would hand to someone new at the craft?
Oh my gosh, there's already too much advice out there, Hank. I got to tell you. I would say, I don't know. I mean, I would say read a lot, and that's been the best thing for me. And then I guess maybe I would say, like, disappointment is going to be a given, and use it as motivation rather than an obstacle. Like, I know, a lot of writers you're going to hit so many walls as a writer. Even the most successful writers are going to be rejected a lot. And somehow you got to find a way to make that work for you and just to keep pushing on. And I think that's one of the hardest things about being a writer, is you're going to be told no an awful lot before you hear any yeses.
Yeah, that's something that people don't talk about a lot, is that a lot of lonely hours go into novel writing. And it's one of those things that if you're a singer, you can sing for 3 minutes and get instant feedback, or nearly instant feedback. But if you're writing a 100,000 word novel, that's a lot.
Right.
That's a lot of time going in before you get any feedback, and then you hope that the feedback you get is constructive instead of just a form rejection letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what do you do in those times where you put all this work into it? You feel like this is this is an important story to you. What do you do with that rejection to keep moving forward?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I know I just kept writing and kept thinking of stories and kept trying to get better. I mean, I think it's always good to believe in yourself, but it's also important, if people are telling you this particular novel or story is not good enough, listen to them, and they might be right, and you can always get better. And I know I've gotten better and better over the years, so I try to, like, stick to my guns. At the same time, I keep an open mind, and that's a balancing act. It's tricky to do sometimes, but I think it's important.
Yeah. Lou, if people are just learning about you and your work and maybe want to dig into all that you do and your back catalog and all that good stuff, where can they find you online?
They can hit me at louberney.com. That's my website, and I'm also published by William Morrow and HarperCollins, so you can find me there as well.
Excellent. And the book November Road, when people are hearing this episode, will be out everywhere. It's in hardback. I'm assuming it's going to be an audiobook too. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Yep. Kindle version. Any way that you read books, you can find Lou Berney's November Road. This carries the author story seal of approval. I love this book, Lou. Thank you for writing it, and thanks for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was walking through the woods between Wolfert's Roost and the future site of my father's Stone Manor house. The house would eventually stand on what had been old Baltus's pumpkin field, the land where I had found my grandfather's head. Father had chosen the spot for its view of the Hudson River. Knoll was to be a grand mansion in the Gothic Revival style, but at the time the mansion was but a few foundations of Van Brunt stone. I had become fond of the place already, the idea of it, and I spent many a night alone in a shack on the property. My mother disapproved. She would have me sleep in the room across from hers in our townhouse. But I was 15 and did not answer to her. I kept a bottle of spirits hidden in the crook of 2 walnut trees near old Baltus's grave. I thought he would approve of the gesture. I had stopped along my way to fetch it out. At the moment the first pull of liquor touched my throat, I heard a ghastly, inhuman laugh. I was not alone in the woods. Had God sent the horseman after me? Had I sinned that terribly? I ran through the wood and found the field where Noel was to be built. The outline of the foundations was barely discernible beneath the snow. An apparition stood there. Though I have seen him many times since, I shall never forget my first glimpse. Gaunt in moonlight, headless, exuding power and malice. A magic thing in the land of the ordinary. The headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow. What chills those words evoke! It charged at me, hatchet raised. I stood transfixed, unable to move, unable to even imagine escape. This was the servant of God, after all, sent to strike down sinners. I hurled the bottle from my hand, ashamed that I had become a drunkard as Baltus had been. It shattered against the foundations of Noel. I stretched out my arms and awaited judgment. A piercing white light broke the darkness. The horse reared. "Not my Dylan!" cried Agatha, appearing from the wood. She held a skull in her hand. It shone brightly as a diamond, and in that moment I understood. The horseman did not serve God. He served my grandmother. Perhaps in that moment I came to see Agatha and God as one and the same. The unholy spirit fought her command. A foreleg of the demon horse struck my head with such power that I fell backwards with a cry and knew no more. I carry the scar to this day. A slight indentation in my temple, barely noticeable. In my days of courting I was told that when I am angry the patch of insulted skull bone will stand out in a disturbing manner. I have never had occasion to see this phenomenon, however, as I am generally well pleased whenever I pass a mirror.